Go away for a week and everything changes. Good evening. Welcome back to our continuing exploration of the development and understanding of what is the view in the Buddhist tradition. Tonight we're concluding the Yogacara edition, section, that exploration with the tradition of logic or epistemology of Dignaga and Dharmakirti. So let's begin with our usual chanting. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, may I take refuge. In order that all beings may enjoy. I can't remember.
In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all are steps in the path of omniscience. May these arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this.
Thank you, Cynthia. My head got so confused because we did so many different types of chanting all week long. It's good.
The meal chant. Excuse. For the meal chant, I realized I could do in order that all beings may obtain Buddha from my heart. I take refuge in three jewels, and I skipped all the Buddha, Dharma. I was like, oh, that's saying the same thing.
Yeah, it gets your food faster.
Yeah, exactly.
So tonight we had one little class on Dignaga Dharmakirti's exploration of what Westerners call epistemology. I'm not convinced that's a good term for what they do, but probably good enough. And we focused on a small little text by Dignaga and an excerpt from a text by Dharmakirti that focuses on the same topic. Thanks to Chris for finding those. The Dharmakirti text. And we didn't do our usual exploration of the background in Westerhoff, which I found incredibly helpful. So I wonder if people have their Westerhoff book handy by any chance. I could pause for a minute, let folks get that, because I think it's really helpful. Chris, did you check out Westerhoff?
Sure did.
Dedicated Westerhoff fan.
I got the big foam #1 hand Westerhoff.
Right. We should meet him sometime. We should invite him to give a talk or something.
Yeah, I think that would be really nice. I mean, we'd have to work with the time difference, right? Because he's over at Oxford, but
yeah,
we'd have to do really fun.
Maybe a morning for us.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a prolific guy, and quite an amazing at presenting information on this wonderful and also wonderful insight into these traditions. So he starts on page 216. But I thought, let's just take a quick look at the text.
Can you give something other than just the page number? Because I'm on electronic and they don't do page numbers.
Yeah. Let's see. It says 4. Is that part 4 or chapter 4?
I think it's chapter 4, the School of Dignaga and Dharmakirti.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chris is typing. Envy. So I thought maybe we could start first with the root text that we have by Dignaga called the Auto Commentary to Investigation of the Percept. So it's from a book called Dignaga's Investigation of the Percept, which itself is such an odd term. Jane saw the book and she's like, what? What is a percept? Is that like, did they misspell that? Is it supposed to be precept? And let's see, we're on what page of the source book are we on? Sorry.
Page 208 of the source book.
Oh, there, very good. 208. Thank you, Chris. So page 208 of the source book. So the root text is very short, only a few pages, and then here we have a slightly expanded explanation of the root text, so to speak, by Dignaga. Translated into English, although it probably seems like it's still in some other foreign language. And it's translated by a group of people. Also, like, hard to imagine how they could have agreed on the translation of such a technical text. Between 5 people? I can't imagine agreeing on anything between 5 people. Anyway, in Sanskrit, alambana, pariksha, vritti. So vritti is a type of commentary, and pariksha is investigation, and alambana is the percept. It's the object of perception. In Tibetan, mikpa, takpe, drill. So many different types of commentaries in the tradition, and this is a vritti. Homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Some, maybe some of you, maybe me, maintain that the percept of a sensory cognition, such as vision, is an external object. Most people, I would say, believe that. They must suppose that it is fundamental particles, because this is what causes cognition. Or that it is a collection, because that is what appears to cognition. Okay, so we have fundamental particles, or the partless particles of the Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas, particles that are the foundation of reality. They have svalakshana, true nature, self-nature, and they are imperceptible, momentary, and they do not meet, but they are the building blocks of reality. Can anybody name an example of one such creature? I know we've never seen one, so it's hard to come up with one. But any ideas? What's a partless? Give an example of a fundamental particle. The word in English might be a little clunky, like for it, because we don't really have a good word for it. But Chris,
Yeah, string. Yeah, string theory.
string theory.
Yeah, some of those
Can you?
strings are said to not have parts.
But can we stay within the Buddhist tradition?
Ah, well, how about a
That
dharma?
would be Dharma. Yeah, yeah,
How
a
about a
Dharma.
dharma?
So
Sorry, I thought you were trying to get us out of the Buddhist tradition. I should have known better.
no, I never do that. I don't know anything other than the Buddhist tradition, so I stay far away from any other systems. That's your ballywick. So dharmas, fundamental particles are dharmas. And can you give me an example of one? So it's simpler than you think.
How about red? Since we're in the field of
The
visual
color red,
color red.
Mary Beth.
Well, didn't we learn about like a particle of water and a particle of earth and a particle of fire? Is
Yeah,
that
totally, totally, yeah, totally. The four elements, right? And we said that a dharma, uh, it's a little bit unclear, right, whether a dharma is an individual element or whether a dharma is the eightfold compilation, right?
Yeah, I thought that we had been confused by this, that they had to have all of them in together, all of the
Yeah,
elements together.
it did seem to conclude that an atom has a minimum of eight parts, which are the four elements and four of the five sense objects. Does that
So,
sound
which,
familiar?
yes, which is why that really means that an element is at a lower level than a so-called dharma or partless particle, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Which
It's a
does not,
sub. It breaks the definition right away.
yeah, okay. Just want to make
It's
sure
a
I'm not missing
part of
something
a
here.
partless particle.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Thank you.
starting off on a good foot. And what's a collection? Can you give an example of a collection?
A heap of beans.
A heap of beans. How about one bean?
One bean also.
Okay.
One bean also. Now, Chris, earlier you came up with the example of red. Red
Sure
is
did.
a little bit tricky. These colors, right? So, is a color a atom, a partless particle?
You know, you're the expert with the list of these. I'm not sure if the colors made it onto the list. I think they did. Do they not? Don't we isn't the idea that color is the only thing that is perceived, but that shape is conceptual
Yeah, yeah.
projection?
We never really ironed this out thoroughly when we went through the dharmas and this issue. We focused sort of like on this oddity of atoms and conglomerates and so forth. But so one of the eight parts of a partless particle is a visual form, and visual forms can be of various colors. Now, we in the West would probably say that variety is infinite. Is that correct? Or like how many colors can there be? Are there? Or is it just like the three primaries? There's only three colors. It's amazing how complicated it's like we went through this over and over and it's just not clear. It's so funny.
Well, there again, I'm not sure whether if you're talking about within the Buddhist framework. I don't know if they have a
Yeah,
different,
within the Buddhist framework.
yeah, I have no idea how they think about color in terms of fixed,
Yeah,
do
we
they
didn't
limit
really,
it
really
down?
get to color. Color is such an oddity. It's like,
It's like infinite in some ways.
yeah, there's this weird thing of like, is color itself a dharma, or do dharmas possess qualities that are colors? So we never really worked through that one, and like, how many colors are there? And like, they debate these things, how many colors there are, and then there's, I think there's like four main colors in the Buddhist Abhidharma, and then they make combinations by mixing them, obviously.
And then things like cloudy, like
Yeah, they
shadow.
have primary colors, and then they have sort of aspects of color, and one is like cloudy. The way that clouds have a certain sort of texture of whatever color the clouds can be. Normally white, but they can be gray and red or whatever. Anyway, so we have we have a visual cognition, and people believe that the percept of a visual cognition is an external object. They have that as one. They suppose it's either a fundamental particle that we directly see atoms from the Buddhist traditional point of view, because this is what causes cognition, or that it's a collection of atoms conglomerated together that might be in the form of a coffee bean, which is actually what appears to cognition, because we don't see partless particles, right? We see conglomerates. Okay, so that's the proposition, that three things: that the percept is external object, and that object is either a fundamental particle or a conglomerate. People, looking at the notes, anything good in the notes? Okay, so the next page is 209. In the first case, being, what if it's a partless particle? Even if sensory cognition were caused by fundamental particles, it would not have particles as its object, because they do not appear to cognition any more than the sense faculties themselves do. So, if sensory cognition were caused, so we went from the topic of what's the percept of a sensory cognition, and he went from there to what causes a sensory cognition, implying that the object causes the sensory cognition. Is that a fair assumption? I mean, it might be one of many types of causes. We looked at different types of causes or conditions, but let's say it's the object condition of a sense cognition. And the causal condition, let's say, is light shines on it and comes into one's eye. The dominant condition is the sense faculty, and the immediately preceding cognition is thought to look at something. So, even if sensory cognition were caused by fundamental particles, it would not have particles as its object, because they do not appear to cognition any more than the sense faculties do. So, he's using the standard Abhidharma definition that partless particles don't appear to cognition, which begs the question of why did he say that they might suppose that? It's a little bit odd that he gave that as an option early on, and then he dispenses with it. But he's cleaving to the general consensus of the tradition about Abhidharma, that partless particles are not the object that appears to cognition. They might be the object that causes it, but they don't actually appear because we never see them, right? Okay. And he says, Mary Beth, they're too small. Yeah. And they're too small, so you can't see them, you can't hear them, meaning I guess they're too faint on a single basis. You can't touch them, meaning that our sensory receptors of our sense of touch is not fine enough. You can't taste them, our taste buds are not fine enough. And can't smell them. They don't have enough smell. Okay, then he says, similarly, our sense faculties don't appear to cognition. We can't see our own faculties, right? And why is that? What are the sense faculties made out of? There's another thing that is not that really clear, right? So the sense
These are those bizarre things that are like a blue, or those,
lotus, Utpala flower,
right. So,
besides
but they're supposedly clear or
lucent. Yeah.
translucent, right?
They're subtle. They're like subtle matter. They're
Subtle.
imperceptible.
They're liminal.
Rob,
They're liminal. They're the in
that's a
between
good
state.
description.
The in between state between mind and matter.
Yeah, they are, and it's such a weird proposition that, like, within matter there's this type of matter called subtle matter that is like in between, as Rob says, in between matter and space or energy or something.
But I don't. I mean, this is sort of an aside, but I don't think that that was as much of an issue for them as it is for us. You know, they viewed the aggregates as the psychophysical, neither obtaining to specifically one realm or the other, but as sort of a world that is suffused with both.
But when they classify them, they put them in the matter category.
Right.
I don't know if that matters.
Never mind.
It's amazing how hard it is to describe the simplest things, and how easy it is to take it apart, therefore, right? Which is what he does. An object is defined as something whose identity is ascertained by cognition. So that's a conceptual construct, and that's fairly straightforward. It's like you define object as the object of a cognition. The object is that which is cognized, right? You know, at some point years ago, we looked at Dudra, the collected topics, which is like, just gives you really simple definitions of various aspects of Buddhist world. And an object is that which is cognized, that which...
I just have one question on that with the footnote where the footnote 10 when on identity says svabhava. So I'm just curious is that it seems like that's actually implying something even more than simple cognition. Isn't svabhava like the nature thing?
It is self-nature, bhava is self-entity, self-nature. So an object is defined as something whose identity, whose swalakshana, is ascertained by cognition. So in the case of a coffee bean, what is the swalakshana of a coffee bean? So that's a good point, Cynthia. You know, so isn't the idea of swalakshanas is that they are fundamental particles, are swalakshanas, right? And conglomerates don't really have swalakshana. They're sort of imaginary constructs. So this is a bit of an odd definition that they put in the word identity, whose identity is ascertained by cognition, because a cognition arises with its representation. So when we see a coffee bean, that which our conceptual, our cognitive system experiences is a coffee bean. It experiences the cognition of a coffee bean by definition. We okay so far? Everyone agree with that? Minute particles may be the cause of the cognition, because really coffee beans are made of minute particles, so cause has to be a real thing. But it does not have their appearance. We don't actually see the appearance of fundamental particles. We see coffee bean. So we look at one thing. We look at partless particles, or conglomeration of them, and we see something else. Isn't that like a hallucination? We look around the rooms that we occupy at our normal perception, and we see objects, and yet we're told that there's really just atoms here. So where do the objects come from? Sort of a mystery.
Now, that's something that's also, in a sense, common to Western science, where they tell us that there's, all this movement and waves and all this other stuff that's going on where we see just a solid block, right?
Yeah, yes. Neurologists, neuroscientists, physicists, they will all agree totally with this, that we see what's not there.
Right. So that's one place where there's a common sense of illusion
A
there.
locus, yeah, common locus of view. And as Chris said, they believe that there's something like strings or something that's actually there. And we see tables and chairs and people and so forth. So we have a common sense of delusion that goes on through the senses. We're talking about sense perception here, right? Which, just to sort of cut to the chase, there's these two types of knowledge of our world, not direct, of knowledge of our world. One is perception, and then inference. And inference is built on perception, so perception is crucial. If we unpack perception so that it doesn't hold water, then our whole system of knowledge is sort of out the window in some way. This is also true of the sense faculties. Thus, first of all, minute particles are not the percept. So we don't see minute particles. The sensory cognition, they have the appearance of a collection, of a coffee bean, but it does not come from that of which it has the appearance. The appearance of a coffee bean, so the second part of that sentence is a little linguistically complicated. The sensory cognition does not come from that of which it has the appearance. It has the appearance of a coffee bean in the case that we're using. And it can't come from that because a coffee bean is a fictitious entity. And so it can't be causally efficacious. So the cognition arises that doesn't come, is not caused by that by which it experiences. It makes sense that an object, to continue on page 10, an object is a percept if it produces an appearance of itself. So he's saying, let's go back to this definition of what is an object as the identity about it is ascertained. And the key term of Swalakshana, he's saying that definition really doesn't hold water. This is because, to return to this text, we all see that the root text is in bold and the commentary is in non-bold. This is because it is said to be a condition for the arising of cognition, which is what I just explained, that for an object to be a condition, causal condition for the arising of the cognition of that object, it has to have causal efficacy. It has to be a dharma, a real thing. A collection, however, is not like this because it's not substantially real. The coffee bean is not substantially real. It appears, but it's not there, just like a double moon, which is a famous analogy in the world of Indian lore of like people who see two moons because they have a visual defect. So, what aspect of this sort of structure of reality has Dignaga refuted in this argument?
External objects?
Bingo, right? It's like the idea that we see some external object just doesn't hold water from a logical, scientific point of view. There's got to be some internal world that we're experiencing. We're experiencing our mind.
It's not that different from the West either, because depending on the mind that's perceiving, the environment is completely different. You know, like a bat's point of view is not anything like ours, and neither is a
Well,
grub's.
we tend to see similar backgrounds, but different species see different ones, and certain species see dramatically different. And Rob is drawing on there's the famous article of what's the title? Something about being a bat.
What is it like to be a bat by Thomas Nagel?
What's it like to be a bat? Yeah, and bats, they have eyes, but they barely work, and they live in a sonar world where they're constantly emitting sonar waves and creating a, a representation of the world that's not visual around them by virtue of the sound. But it's such a cool thing to think about. Anyway,
Same thing with whales and dolphins, and whale song carries for like thousands of miles.
thousands? Thousands? So, like from Europe to America? Wow, they don't even need cellular service or whatever it is. That is amazing. They don't need. So, Cynthia?
Yeah, I have to admit, I found, I think in reading both of these things, that I couldn't really follow the logic. And so I was just wondering if you could, even though we just went through it, but the logic that says it can't be external, because it seems like, I don't know, to me, adding in all the stuff about the particles and all of that doesn't seem to, somehow for me, there were too many layers that they put into this that overcomplicated it. I don't know whether that's just my brain not functioning. But do you understand what I mean? That it seems like they put extra kind of layers into this that didn't really add up to logic for me.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really that's a great idea. Why don't we put it in the form of a
Uh-oh.
logical syllogism and then break it down? Everybody game for that? Anybody want to take a shot at what the logical syllogism that we just went through basically is in its simplest form? And I think we can start with what Rob said. External objects are not a cause of perception because
External objects are not what we perceive. Therefore,
therefore there are
what
no
we
external
perceive cannot
objects.
be external.
So external
I actually
objects.
think Dharmakirti spells this out more clearly,
Let's
which
jump
may
to him.
come as a surprise to everyone.
Take it away.
In the
Okay,
second
so
one, it didn't, even there, I was going around a little bit, but so they're not the cause. All right,
let's stay with this syllogism. So external objects is the subject.
right, are not the cause of perception.
It's the hypothesis. What's it called? The thesis.
Well, because partless particles can't meet each other, so the partless particles of the perceiving organs can't meet any kind of partless particle of an external object because they never meet.
So on one level, they're first of all throwing out the is again, I don't know what level we're at in terms of which school system we're in here, but like the whole thing of an aspect and all that stuff that they introduced as the kind of intermediary between external object and consciousness being able to see something, that's where that aspect idea came in, right? So is this sort of, it seems like what you're describing is saying, all right, we're tossing that idea out also. Is that right? Or that that's not relevant?
I don't think they're making that argument yet. Um,
So does this come before that? That's where like I said, I can't tell what.
I think this is really just approaching, uh, imagining an argument with an Abhidharmika, who is proposing that the dharmas are the real source of perception, and saying that on their own terms that can't possibly be true.
Because, well, don't even the Abhidharmas say dharmas aren't seen? They're like the cause of perception, but they're not actually what you see. Isn't that what we just went through earlier?
Right, but still, it's
I
a
don't understand.
foundationalist metaphysics in which the dharmas are the bedrock of reality. Um, if the dharmas aren't perceived, then perception is not grounded in them.
We got to go
It's
through the
saying that the
syllogism.
Abhidharma system is internally inconsistent.
We got to go through the syllogism again and break it down a little bit further. So I'm going to write it. If I can get my computer to open a writable software.
Yeah,
So,
I have it written down, but if you want to, you're going to do it to screen
oh,
share. I think you
I'll
said
let you.
external
Yeah,
objects are not the cause of perception because they are not what we perceive. And then that's what I heard. Is that correct?
I think it's more accurate if we say um, fundamental particles.
Okay, let's start again.
Oh wait. Well, what did you have again?
What I took down from what you had said was that you started out with external objects are not the cause of perception. That was the subject and then the thesis or whatever, because they are not what we perceive. Again, I was just taking notes on whatever was said. I'm not saying this is good.
So I would propose that the proof or the hypothesis, the thesis is that the object of cognition is an external object, is external. How's that? Objects of cognition are not external.
Oh, it's not. I thought you just said that I didn't hear the not.
I did. I did. Sorry. Are not external because
Can't we just say because we're perceiving our senses, not the object? Can't we just cut to the chase?
If we know what the chase is, we could, but I don't think we, not sure that's so clear.
objects of perception are not external because
Because external objects, the dharmas, are not perceivable.
So now that seems to say that there are external objects.
Oh, he didn't say
he's taking at least that part of the Abhidharmaka's argument at face value.
Is that right? Okay, because I guess that's what I haven't been able to figure out by these readings is like, it seems like it's all quicksand, but is there is some ground there that is sort of being taken as common? You're saying that
well, he's taking the system of the Abhidharma that dharmas are not perceptible. So he's saying the object of perception cannot be external because we cannot perceive dharmas.
But how do we define that? Is there some definition that says dharmas are external?
There's something that says that they are. Yeah, so external is not really maybe the right word. He's actually getting that.
Well, it's because all we can perceive is really internal. There's no ability to be outside of our own mind.
That part I can grok. That's about the only clear thing. But it seems like when we try to establish this other stuff, there's several steps of logic that are needed, and I don't feel like I don't know, somehow it seems like they kind of shortcut some of it, and it doesn't add up to a clear, definitive statement of, oh, this is why it couldn't work.
Yeah, we should all write our syllogisms down.
Because also they make this distinction of the issue of collections versus non-collections, which in the second reading, that drove me crazy too, that because it seemed like they got all hung up on that, but that's not really the essential question, I mean, you start with one before you get into the flowing sesame seeds, right?
Should we get into the flowing sesame seeds?
That was a tough one.
I think Neil's chat contribution works okay.
Yeah, what did Neil give us? Dharmas cannot be perceived. External objects consist of dharmas, therefore external objects cannot be perceived. A good deduction.
So then I guess the interesting thing there is that, let's say that establishes that external objects cannot be perceived. Doesn't say anything about whether they exist or not, whether there are any such things. It's just saying, even if there were, we wouldn't be able to see them. Is that right?
That's right.
That's right.
So instead of the logic of just that idea of like the aspect that allows something that is not mind, matter, to be sort of mirrored into the mind, that's the idea of an aspect, right? It's kind of like a mirror of the seemingly non-mind object that's supposedly outside, and that's what allows the consciousness to relate to it. And so this is dispensing with all that and just sort of saying there's just no way to connect, you can't get there from here.
Right. Yeah, and the same issue would apply to the aspect, right? I mean, they don't make this argument, but you set up a regress by introducing the aspect,
Yes.
Then how does the aspect perceive? Well, the aspect has an aspect.
That's one of those where you just kind of either have to take it at face value or on faith or something. It's true. The aspect doesn't make a lot of sense either, but they use it, right?
So I think let's take Neil's and start from the end. External objects cannot be perceived. They cannot be the object of perception. External objects cannot be perceived or the object of perception because external objects consist of dharmas, And by definition, the Abhidharmas could say that dharmas can't be perceived. So we have three elements. We have
And then
dharmas.
Neil just added another further extension, which
Right, but
was
let's stay with the
okay.
first one.
All
We
right.
have dharmas. We have dharmas. We have conglomerates, which is which is experienced, and then we have perceivers. And perceivers perceive conglomerates. They perceive what appears to the mind, and conglomerates are conceptual imputations and they're not dharmas, they're not causally efficacious entities. So therefore what is perceived is not an external object, but is not an external object. I don't know that you can say anything more about it. If it's not an external object, then it's an internal, or it is a mental dharma.
So then if we've cut the tie between the what is thought to be external things like dharmas or whatever, then I guess the question is what is perceiving conglomerates of what? It seems like that's like taking the pieces of conglomerates are dharmas, which are not seen. Why would we be seeing in our minds conglomerates? How do we know they're conglomerates of what? You know,
That's what it gets to, is that conglomeration is a fiction. It's like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. That, like, if you put two partless particles together, you can't see them, but if you put three, you can't. And at some point, more of invisible things becomes visible, which is illogical.
Right, as if we're putting a giant jigsaw puzzle together.
And we should remember that this is very similar to the type of argumentation we saw with Nagarjuna, using the Abhidharmika's own system to demonstrate its incomprehensibility. They're not necessarily proposing a new system in its place, but are demonstrating that Abhidharma makes no sense on its own terms.
That's the cool
when you
thing.
say
They
they,
don't
you mean the
get messed up
Madhyamaka.
into they being Dharmakirti and Dignaga, the logicians. They don't put forward the three natures, the Alaya Vijnana. They don't get into any of that fun stuff, at least in this section of their texts,
And so
which is
they're not really talking
pure
about,
logic.
okay, so then again, in terms of this not positing the alternative, they're not saying what we perceive is just mind. They're just saying, okay, that doesn't make any sense, and then stopping there. Or are they, I don't remember, actually, even though I read it several times, I've forgotten where they go next. I suppose we could.
They don't really conclude anything.
Well, Dharmakirti addresses this one actually on page 219.
Okay, go there.
Page 219. This is going to be verse 3.211. Chapter 3, verse 211 through 13.
Yes, the spatially extended appearance.
Well, let's just do 212. This part of awareness, namely the one that is established such that it seems external, is different from internal determination, which is the part of awareness that seems to be the subjectivity that apprehends the apparently external part. Awareness is not differentiated, but its appearance is differentiated into two. This being the case, that dualistic appearance must be cognitive confusion. And he's saying that because in the previous paragraphs, he's demonstrated why externality cannot be the case. The non-existence of one of the two in awareness eliminates the existence of both. Therefore, the emptiness of duality is the suchness, the tattva of awareness. So we don't have an argument saying the external is unreal, therefore all must be mind. We have an argument demonstrating that the unreality of the external makes that whole distinction of internal, of mind, matter, internal, external, to be incoherent.
And so, in the case of this syllogism, as well as the earlier syllogism, there's a key aspect that's of the reason, or that is the reason. So, in the prior example from Dignaga, the key aspect that became the reason is that real dharmas are imperceptible. Right? That was the part that makes external perception of external objects unsupportable. Here, the key feature is that awareness is not differentiable. Mind doesn't have parts. So the sense of it being appearing as two or differentiated into two is delusional.
So when we say mind here, what do we mean?
The perceptive quality.
Like just sort of cognition?
Well, these translators use the word awareness.
Awareness.
As trying to be as general as possible.
And so you're sort of associating
cognitive capability.
Cognitive, like knowing, basic knowing, right?
Basic knowing, yeah, basic know.
So in effect, all this stuff about like mind and consciousnesses and all those different layers, that's not in this picture. Here we're just talking about this sort of more fundamental aspect of mind, or of, I guess we're calling it mind still, right? Or awareness, I guess. Well, actually, maybe not. Maybe we don't even call it mind here. Is that?
No, I think they're talking about consciousness. So this
like single momentary consciousness?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Definitely momentary.
Yeah, you got it. Bite size.
Mm-hmm.
It's divisible into moments. Even though it's not differentiated.
Maybe
that later falls apart also, right? Yeah.
Maybe we can go through some of Dharmakirti's arguments, just in the interest of time.
Go for it.
Yeah, I found this text to be very challenging, and I think I sent it to Derek, and he responded with a one-word email, seriously. But actually really rewarding when you get into it. So let's get into it. We're on page 216, and I'm gonna do my best to go fast. We'll see. Page 216, the first paragraph. This is verse 194. That which is aggregated, right? So dharmas coming together, is a conglomerate, and in that sense is a universal. Universal being a generally characterized phenomenon, right? So a thing like a coffee bean, not the individual dharmas that make up the coffee bean, but the coffee bean itself. According to Buddhists such as Vasubandhu, one has perceptions of such things, such universals, such coffee beans. Furthermore, any cognition of a universal is necessarily associated with conceptuality. Hence, it is wrong to say that perception is free of conceptuality. And this is his main point that he wants to make, is that we think of perception as a direct window to the world, and we're perceiving reality in a transparent sense. But the argument he's going to spell out here is that perception is inherently conceptual, and that there is no window to the world at all. The dharmas are not in any way perceivable um, on the terms that the Abhidharmakas themselves put forward.
Is it because there's no window or because there's no world?
It's because the things that are proposed to make up the world cannot be perceived. So perhaps we could say the issue is the lack of a window. But without a window, we can't necessarily speculate as to what could be on the other side of the non-window. Cynthia.
So one of the questions that came up for me with this reading, and again, this may be really my brain being dense, but or me having the wrong understanding of universals. So if is that I think I used to understand that there's that a specifically characterized phenomena versus a generally characterized phenomena, that a generally characterized phenomena is like a concept, like for
Mhm,
example table is one of our favorites, right? And that
mhm.
there could be a million different types of table, but the notion of a table is a generally characterized phenomena. But when I was reading this, I got the feeling that even the table that we think we see, notwithstanding all the arguments that we're debating here, that even that table is a universal. Am I?
Yeah, that seems to be how the way the term is being used.
And so therefore,
Which I agree with you is a little funny.
so it seems like they're basically saying any conglomerate is a universal.
Hmm.
So the blue Gamden that you're actually staring at right in front of your face, that specific one, is still a universal in
Is
their
a
mind.
universal.
So is that a different view of, the general and specific, or is it? I'm just curious about that.
It becomes a universal when you label it.
Uh, I'm not getting the. That's
Any
not the sense that I
conglomeration
got from
is a
this.
universal.
What's that?
Any conglomeration is a universal.
Which is a different use of the term than like the universal table versus the specific that table.
Yeah.
In this case, any perception that is conceptual in nature is a universal, is a generally characterized phenomenon.
And they're determining that it's conceptual because of the fact that it's a conglomerate, right?
And because a conglomerate is a conceptual creation. Only by the Abhidharmakas, only the dharmas are non-conceptual. Conglomerating them together is a conceptual activity.
Because again, when you were talking earlier about perception, that we used to, in simplistic terms, think that it was sort of a straight window into something, whatever it is.
Mhm.
That's completely gone now. Everything is viewed as, I guess, the funny thing is that it's conceptual because of a concept that we're not even thinking about when we're looking at things, so-called things,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I mean, nobody's looking at the GOM. I mean, most of us, I'm sorry, most of us are not looking at the computer in front of us and thinking the dharmas behind it are conglomerating to come to this.
Right. We just think computer and think that what we're perceiving is a real thing.
Right. Or we see blue, black, green, whatever the color is, light, all of that stuff. We see that.
Yeah.
We're not thinking, so this thing that's making it into a concept is a concept we're not even thinking about. And
The concept is operative on an imperceptible level. This is an automatic, and right, Buddhism's very concerned with, automatic misperception.
right. Yeah, it's
So,
just this,
so
this change in the idea of what's a universal I found it a little additional complication there.
Sure, sure. And we
well,
could
let's
talk about
clarify
that.
that we don't actually perceive conglomerations of imperceptible particles, right? We perceive whole phenomena, whole things, and there's no way that conglomerations can conglomerate in any way to anything that we ever perceive.
Mhm.
It's
But
like enough invisible particles cannot become visible. Enough partless particles conglomerated can't become tables and chairs.
But isn't that what they think was happening? I mean, what you're saying makes sense to me that those things can't conglomerate, but here they seem to be saying
They didn't really
there are
clarify
aggregated
that.
things that
They
they're
did
calling
not.
conglomerates.
They didn't really get that far. They said there's fundamental particles, and they conglomerate to create phenomena,
Universes.
and they don't really connect that to what we perceive, the
Well, it
objects
does
that
say
we
one has
perceive.
perception of such things.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, is that the perception of wholes, that does count as perception. And he's not trying to explain away that, you're perceiving a can of seltzer here. What he's trying to do is sever the link between this perception and the idea of like a foundational atomistic metaphysics that grounds it. So the argument he's setting up is that if aggregates are real objects of perception, then perception is conceptual. Okay, so in next 195, due to a relation with other things, i.e., other particles, infinitesimal particles that are different than their own previous moments arise from their own previous moments, such that can produce an awareness. In that sense, they are said to be aggregated, and as such, they are said to be a condition for the production of awareness. The the tiny little things come together, and when they come together, we're said to be able to see them. Uh, Furthermore, I'm just going to kind of summarize these following paragraphs. Furthermore, awareness is never of a single dharma, only of the aggregates. Dharmas that do not aggregate are not observed. Uh, yeah, okay. So then we have this wonderful, there's a series of sort of interesting images here. And the first is of a heap of sesame seeds, which similar to our heap of coffee beans. Um, so we perceive the heap of coffee beans or sesame seeds as one distinct thing, one clump. Um, and and we perceive it simultaneously. There's that clump altogether that I'm looking at one moment. And the argument that he's making here is that is impossible because you can only perceive one thing at a time. You can only perceive one sesame seed at a time. The mind in the Abhidharma system can only perceive one thing at a time. And by moving very quickly, it's able to perceive wholes. Uh, so, you think you're seeing a heap of sesame seeds at one moment. What's happening is that your mind is darting very quickly between many, many different sesame seeds to form this aggregate.
And
So
I'm
that
going to ask you, can you really even see one single sesame seed at once?
Sure, sure. I think the argument continues, on the
All
way
the
all
way
the way
down.
down. Yeah, yeah. Um, so again, he maintains the argument that we do experience plurality, um, but based on the Abhidharmika's own definition of perception, in that multiple things can't be perceived simultaneously. Uh, the experience of plurality, the experience of a pile of sesame seeds, is a conceptual fiction that takes place, that is based on perception that takes place over time. We think of it as a single moment, but the perceptions that underlie that are durational. So it's so perception is instantaneous and particular non-conceptual, but cognition is synthesized, unified, and generalized. Um, So then we move to another image of a multicolored phenomena, and this is similar to plurality. We see an object with multiple parts of the same. We could see an object of multiple different parts. We see a butterfly wing in many different colors. Um, those again are particulars that have to be perceived of separately. They are put together into a whole, but that putting together is a conceptual fiction.
Do you remember when we went through the different subdivisions of the Yogacharans? They have different views on, like, is there one consciousness of multiple objects, or are there multiple consciousnesses of multiple objects, or is there does the is there an object? Is there a multicolored object that's one thing? And the equal parts folks were called I think they were called the half-eggists, because the eggs are like split, right? Half is perception, half is object. But sorry, Chris, go on. You're on a roll.
Well, so
Sesame roll.
Sesame roll, yeah. So we have some examples of let's see, in those cases where one sees a single color and not multicolor, one is just seeing the color that is a part of the whole. So there's the idea that you could break the perception down into smaller little units, so you just see the blue part of the wing. The wing is still multicolored, and trying to separate it into you're artificially trying to slice up your perception in a way that it doesn't actually appear to you. If after eliminating the constituent colors such as blue, you can still see some multicolor that is other than the constituent colors, then what you see is indeed psychedelic. It's indeed unreal if you can separate it from the constituents and have it still exist. That idea is incoherent, is what he's saying. You can't remove the particulars, that the general is still dependent on all of them. Yep. So then he has this. He's responding, I think, in this next part, where he brings a fake butterfly into the real butterfly, and they look the same. He's sort of saying that he's anticipating a naturalistic response to this argument, that like, yeah, well, surely we all agree that butterflies exist and are real things. You're perceiving a real butterfly, therefore there must be something foundational in them. Even though these arguments you make are valid, there must be something real there. And he said, no, because you can have a fake butterfly that is just as convincing, the same visual perception. The idea is that he's trying again to sever the idea of wholes and parts. You may want to say that the butterfly must be a whole because we perceive it. It must be a real thing. But a fake butterfly can have the same perception. Cynthia.
Actually, what happened for me going through this whole thing, and I read through it many, many times,
Yeah.
was it just seemed like all of these little extra details that he added to me actually sort of threw me off. It seemed like I guess the question is, what is the core argument they're trying to make? Because if the core argument is it's not outside, it's inside, it's there's no duality of mind and matter. If that's the core argument that they're trying to make, all these other things seem to me like slight diversions. The one and the many, the multicolor, all of those seemed like diversions from the core issue of we're just trying to figure out whether what we're experiencing is all kind of a projection or creation of our consciousness, as opposed to being a perception of something. That's what I thought the essential, but I'm not sure. I mean, I found myself getting lost in these things because it didn't seem like it was clear what's the main argument they are trying to make.
I think the main argument that's being made is against the idea of real wholes, real aggregates coming together that are perceivable. And it's against that, and it's for the perception of particulars. And that perception needs to, in order for the system to make sense, perception needs to be non-conceptual, but perception is always conceptual. So he's really just taking apart in a way similar to Nagarjuna, taking apart the Abhidharmika's system, and really from a first person point of view.
Okay, that's helpful. And I guess that's the problem for me is that I may be looking for an answer to a different question, which is this difference of inside outside, which is something that, because I spend some of my spare time reading the profound inner topics, as I've said a few times, trying to understand that other view of reality, of that it's more of a projection that's created from our mind. And yet they keep coming back and grounding all the arguments in perceptual arguments, which
Mhm.
to me seems like, okay, fine, if we want to sever the notion of perceiving external things, let's look at but they seem to stay with it, but just are tearing apart the logic of it, I guess, is what.
Well, he does get into the external internal distinction later, as we talked about earlier. Um, and I'll just kind of
Yeah.
do this last bit and wrap it up. The Well, one thing first is that he has this wonderful example of the painting, which seems to be proposing the idea of the unity is constructed, that you could have an image in a painting of a person portrait, uh, and maybe we could even say it's a digital painting and it's made out of pixels. And we all accept that the unifying image of the painted person made of pixels is a conceptual projection. Only the pixels are what is actually being perceived. But then he wants to have make this argument about spatial perception. This is going to be 211 on page 219. Therefore, neither the objects nor the awareness has a spatially extended experience, since that kind of property, swabhava, namely spatial extension, has already been disproved in the case of a single entity. It is also not possible in the case of what is many. So because, as we've been discussing, dharmas are dimensionless, partless particles, they and this is an argument we've seen before, because they're dimensionless, aggregating them together will not create dimension. Things without, no matter how many things without mass you add, you're never going to get mass. Therefore, the perception of spatial extension is necessarily a conceptual invention, conceptually added to the dharmas. And so, if spatial extension is not a real thing, is a conceptual creation, we really have no way of differentiating between what is internal and what is external. Spatial extension is sort of the hallmark of externality. things are external because they exist in space, unlike our thoughts, which are somehow, immaterial. But if spatial extension, of externality, if dimensionality is a conceptual fiction, then there's and not ultimately real, there's no way that we can distinguish between those things. And with that distinction being dissolved, um, internal reality also is not comprehensible. Um, Going forward a little bit. 215. There is no definition of things outside of the definition of them as either subjects or objects. Those definitions do not ultimately make sense. Therefore, since things are empty of any definition, it is explained that they are essenceless. So, I think that's probably good on that. Derek?
Thank you, Chris. Mary Beth.
I may be way off here, like in another field, but like when we learn about um yogic direct perception, is that something that like fits into this scheme? And yeah, because I'm I'm pretty sure that yogic direct perception is without conceptuality, like somehow that's what makes it a special. But is it part of this scheme, or did we lose it already, or does it come later?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think that in a certain sense, what he's done here is demolished the possibility of dualistic perception. So, if we define direct yogic perception as non-dual perception, there's all the room in the world for it in this scheme. All he's shown is what can't be that dualistic perception is mistaken. He so far has nothing to say about non-dual perception. Cynthia.
That seems to raise the question of what is the definition of perception?
Right.
Because I imagine some definitions would be inherently making it a dualistic process. What's the point of perception if there's not a perceiver and a perceived? And so therefore, perhaps the whole notion of using that word no longer makes sense, that we would need a different word to talk about what non-dual experience is.
Yeah, not only a different word, but I mean, I would go as far as to say like language itself doesn't seem to be up for the task.
But even if understanding that, yes, language is always imperfect, and let's just say we're pointing at the moon and all that. But I'll even go for non-dual experience is probably preferable to non-dual perception, because although you could say experience implies a experiencer, I'm not sure if it does. But perception certainly seems like it implies two parts. Anyway, just throwing it out there that it does require kind of a different, maybe even set of terms to.
You could say that it's non-conceptual experience, whereas inference is conceptual valid experience. Perception is said to be non-conceptual valid experience. and inference is conceptual valid experience.
You're
It's a
saying
broad.
you're saying this is going back to the idea that there's perception and inference are the two ways we know things,
So we're
right?
inferring a coffee bean rather than just like experiencing or perceiving a coffee bean. We're inferring that that's what that is. Well, somebody told me that's what they look like. So, or I tasted the coffee that got made from it. So, but that's all inferring then.
Yeah, that's all inference.
Then
Wrong.
everything is inference. I mean, because I'm not a Buddha. I'm gonna, I think that the Buddha did not infer somehow.
He has a really sorry, I said I was done. He's he's got a really good one here. And maybe Derek can help explain the metaphor. This is verse 219. Um, Therefore, the Buddhas, ignoring the ultimate, close one eye like an elephant and propagate theories that involve external objects merely in accord with worldly perceptions.
I liked that line too.
That was
At
terrific.
least it explained one thing.
So
Um,
that
So
they're
the idea is that, yeah,
they're just
Buddha,
going along. They just go along. The Buddhas just go along with what all of us are, saying and seeing as a convention,
yeah, but they're not in
believing it.
they're not participating in this illusory game of realism. But they close one eye and kind of talk like they are.
Well, they have to, because
Yeah, because they got to talk to us, who are totally confused,
inferring all the time.
inferring all sorts of things.
mostly furry. Rob,
What my takeaway from this chapter is by demolishing um, the idea of dual perception, duality, in what I think to be actually a pretty good way. He's actually pointing out, that reality, that non-dual reality is for real, and that this path is like the real deal. I mean, this is like a big neon sign saying, "Yeah, keep going this way." You know, so that's my takeaway. I mean, I was like really happy to jump in on this class and like land on this. This is like, wow, this is great.
it's pretty cool. So how does it differ from the Garjana? They both sort of end up in a similar place, right?
I think
Morgan, Morgan, you're our. Oh, sorry.
Chris hit it on the head when he said it's first person. This is a first person deconstruction.
Perceptual
Yes.
deconstruction. Whereas Nagarjuna doesn't talk a lot about perception. Morgan, what's your take on it? How does it veer from the purity of the Karikas?
No, I mean, I think you're right that Nagarjuna doesn't talk about perception because that's all still dual from his perspective, or from the Karika's perspective, I think, as I understand them, is, there any act of perception, even if it's purely internal, there's a perceiver and a percept. And that's not something that the Karikas allows for, or it's something that the Karikas shows is internally inconsistent.
But Dharma,
Interesting
just to
chapter
play
on
devil's
this.
advocate here, Dharmakirti also shows that it's inconsistent.
Um,
Perception, yeah.
but he still leaves open the
Nagarjuna deals with
possibility that there is a kind
entities.
of perception. No? I mean, I
Is it
don't know.
really perception if there's no object?
Not the way most people use that term, no.
Yeah. Interesting little scheme here. So I thought in the remaining minutes we could just skip through briefly the write up in the golden age of Indian Buddhist philosophy on page, which is, let's see, chapter 4, as Chris said, the School of Dignaga in Dharmakirti, page 217. Just give like a little context for what we just went through. He gives the, so we got Dignaga. Dignaga is around 480 to 540. He's a student of Vasubandhu, supposedly, the brother of Asanga. His disciple Ishvaresana is then the teacher of Dharmakirti, and who supposedly is like 550 to 610 or somewhere in those ranges, So 5th to 6th century. Quick little synopsis of Dignaga's life. He starts out as a Pudgalavadan, of all things. And he's dissatisfied with that, studies with Vasubandhu, and decides to compose. After interacting with Vasubandhu, he writes various texts on pramana. Pramana being translated here as epistemic instruments, I think is the term. And he writes famously 7 texts, I think, or 6 texts, and then finally he sets out to write one that summarizes them all. And there's this little legend about how he starts writing it, and starts by saying that the Buddha is the embodiment, which turns out to mean the sort of very essence or outflow of pramana, which he says epistemic instruments. Pramana Bhutaya. Praising the Buddha as being the entity or essence, or the sort of result of valid knowing. And from that develops a whole system of the importance of knowing validly the true nature of reality is what actually is liberative. And thereby focusing on, well, what is genuine, true understanding or knowing, and how do we bring that about? And let's see. He debates Krishna Muniraja, and he's defeated by his magical power. He defeats him in debate, but then the guy has magical powers. He gives up and he throws his chalk supposedly up in the air, resolving when it comes down, he'll cave. And Manjushri enters the scheme. And that's a famous scenario that is repeated later in the life of Varupa, where he gets disillusioned and he tosses his mala in the latrine. And I think it's also Manjushri that fishes it out beforehand, that catches it. Dharmakirti has similar scheme. He studies Dignaga's text with his student Ishwaresana, so page 218, the second page of chapter 4, and surpasses that gentleman, that student of Dignaga, and equals Dignaga, if not surpasses him, and introduces additional aspects of the scheme of pramana. And then he debates a number of other great non-Buddhist philosophers who he wins against, and they either join the Buddhist fold or they kill themselves. In the case of Shankara, supposedly, who comes back, is reborn 3 times and repeats it. The 3rd time he converts to Buddhism. Cute little stories. And basically he concludes on 219. What is interesting about the content of these is they've revealed intellectual background There's an increasing importance put on the ability to defend Buddhism against outsiders, non-Buddhists, in debate. They don't focus on meditation or teaching accomplishment, but on debate. And they're not between other Buddhists, as we saw earlier in the tradition, where like Nagarjuna, Abhidharmas, Yogacaras, they're all fighting or debating internally. Other Buddhists here, they're starting to, they're not starting to, but they're very much engaged in defending Buddhism against non-Buddhist philosophers. And for that reason, they focus on like what are some common ground that we can use as starting points for a debate. And it's not the scriptures or the teachings of the Buddha, because you don't accept those and I don't accept your teacher's scriptures. And so let's start with bare experience, so to speak. And so they come up with perception, non-conceptual experience, and inference. And so on 220, the fifth page or whatever of this section, fourth page, epistemology section 2, Dignaga begins his Pramana Samachaya with a chapter on perception, setting out the key aspects, and addresses the Buddha by the term Pramana Buddha, embodying the Pramana, the means of valid knowing. And this does not mean the Buddha should be regarded as authoritative simply because of his enlightened status, but rather his enlightenment is the fruition of, and therefore flowing in its nature from, the correct application of pramana. Two types mentioned there. 221, bottom of 220. This distinction between two types of knowing, pramana, is nicely mirrored at the ontological level by a distinction between two types of objects, kinds of objects, swalakshana, self-marked, and samanya lakshana, generally marked, commonly interpreted as momentary particles, are the former, and the latter are general objects, generalized objects. And particulars are exclusively accessed by sense perception initially, and in the scheme initially, and objects in general are apprehended by inference. And later they refine that and point out that there's an aspect of the sixth sense mind consciousness that also is of swalakshanas. Dignaga describes the swalakshana entities 221 as free from conceptual construction and indescribable. They're not associated with any name. Perception yields a total but unconceptualized pre-linguistic image of this object. It does not determine or ascertain anything. If we read his theory as a version of the Abhidharma project, we consider the swalakshana entities be the fundamental dharmas, and perception as a route that gives us access to them. He says dharmas can be usefully conceptualized, which is sort of contradictory, but thought about as particularized properties or tropes, like as we said, earth as solidity and water as moisture and so forth. Conceptual construction, on the other hand, only works on groups of dharmas, assembling them together as a property, disregarding the distinctions between different but very similar blue tropes, for example, or an individual object, putting together a blue trope, a shaped trope, and so on, so that you have a blue shaped thingamajig. Technical term. Perception is therefore never perception of the kind of medium-sized dry goods, famous philosophical term of our everyday acquaintance, such as tables and chairs and potatoes. On this interpretation, the swalakshana entities are sometimes compared to the sense data of 20th century Western epistemology. Let's see. The next paragraph, the theory of perception that this school defends faces the following apparent difficulty. On the one hand, perception is understood as non-conceptual, non-erroneous, and directed at what is ultimately real. namely the Swalloxian entities or dharmas. It also can only perceive aggregates of those ultimately real objects, such as infinitesimal particles are the ultimately real particles that can only be perceived in aggregate.
Can you give an example of, it sounds like they're saying there's something that we're seeing that is not at the level of dharmas and is not at the level of tables and chairs, but what, is there an example of what that is?
Collection of partless particles that we call a table and a chair.
But I thought, what isn't what he, maybe I misunderstood the thing where he says the medium-sized dry goods of our everyday acquaintance, such as tables
Those are
and,
tables and chairs.
but I thought that's what he's saying that we're not seeing.
There's a difference between tables and chairs and the conglomeration of partless particles that makes up tables and chairs. And that's the area that he's attacking. He's attacking this idea that the tables and chairs, which are conceptualized entities, are they have as their referent conglomerations of.
But is he still thinking of it as a direct perception that's non-conceptual?
Well, he's working their system, and as we know from the text we just read, he's eventually tearing those systems apart, showing that they're not logical. But he's picking on this gray area that as we found out earlier, in the Abhidharma world, they leave vague as how from partless particles to tables and chairs. What's the intermediary there? And
Okay, somehow it seems like it seemed like it was slightly contradicting what we saw in the other readings, but that may be a wrong interpretation.
I think that's correct. He's sort of, this is sort of the Abhidharma. It's like their pramana system starts from the Abhidharma world. It's like they apply pramana to the Abhidharma scheme, and then they apply the types of cognition, perceptual and inferential, to the Abhidharma scheme, and then using logic they show that it doesn't hold water. Focusing on this area of like basically how do you get from uh, infinitesimal to conglomerates that are perceivable, and how do you get from many uh, many individuals to a single perception, and similar inconsistencies in experience in reality going between. Maybe it's like going from general special relativity to general relativity, something like that, where there's like this divide between these levels of description that they just don't jive together. And that's sort of what you have here. You have our world of experience of tables and chairs, and the Abhidharma world of this refined trope world, where there's just these qualities. And how do you get from one to the other? Chris, do you want to add anything?
I was just thinking of anyone remember the underpants gnomes from South Park? The so the underpants gnomes are the gnomes that steal your underwear, right? And that's why your underwear is always missing. And then eventually the gang, goes to the subterranean place and meets the underpants gnomes and like, why are you
Those are the
stealing all our
socks.
underwear? And they pull down the big chart, and it's like step 1, collect underwear. Step 3, profit.
So they skip a step.
And it feels like
These
that's the Abhidharma. It's like, okay, we got the infinitesimal particles, and then the aggregate.
presto, change-o. That's pulling the rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah.
And that's why we keep tripping up on that, because they leave that part out. They don't clarify that part, and that's what he's focusing in on, is that they've created a nice little system when you only focus on one level, but if you try to reconcile the two, it just doesn't work. And to make to any to create any viable explanation for reality, you have to reconcile the two. So the whole thing then falls apart. And just on the next page, he talks about the examples that we went through on 222. Later, authors try to solve this difficulty by arguing that the cognitive image does not correspond to a single infinitesimal particle or to a whole made of many such particles, but to the fact that many particles together produce the effect of being perceived. So another attempt to explain the inexplicable by just rearranging the furniture, so to speak. And then he talks about the case of the phenomenologically variegated butterfly wing called a psychedelic object in the text. So a nice little explanation here. Then he goes into inference in a helpful way. So a little glimpse into the world of Buddhist logic of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, which ends up infiltrating all the later traditions in India, to the extent that there are any, and primarily in Tibet. We'll see this scheme come up over and over. Any final comments?
And we saw that with Bhaviveka, right?
Yeah.
The attempt to apply their system of pramana to Madhyamaka, and as we all know, that's not the move.
It's not the move. So for him, it was more like an ontological basis. Like we have to agree on an established phenomena in order to show its emptiness. We have to put forward the things of our conventional world. And so these guys, and he was doing it in the world of the ontology and the tenet systems. And these guys are doing a similar project on deconstructing on the epistemological level. And Nagarjuna starts it in his text. There's reference in this Westerhoff to Nagarjuna text where he touches on, begins the whole tradition of logic that develops into this. So let's conclude and dedicate our merit. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings by the confidence of the golden sun of the great east. May the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. So let's see, Neil left us some nice notes here. All of which is simply to reiterate and reinforce that anyone's perception of reality is grossly imperfect, inaccurate, and widely varied by perceiver. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dignaga and Dharmakirti. See you next week.
And next week we'll I think we encounter Shantarakshita, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
And the first attempt to we've been kind of pairing these traditions against each other and attempt to bring them together. So we'll see how that goes.
Thanks,
everyone.